Thank you, Whitney. Hello, everyone. Nice to see you, except I can't really see you. But I've got 15 minutes. The clicker says is going. 15 minutes, innovation, China. So as you can imagine, I'm not going to cover everything in this topic. It's a broad topic. But what I will try and do is give you a point of view, a perspective. And I'm going to split it into 4 sections, if I may. First, just a little bit of context. And then I'm going to move into the kind of more recent changes and the metamorphosis of how China has evolved recently. And I want to talk specifically about the cost of that innovation. And then I will ask us a question, which I will endeavor to answer at the end around whether China has a golden future and how we can look at that going forward. So in 1803, Napoleon talked about China as a sleeping giant, and when she awakes, she shall shake the world. And I think what we're seeing now is a faster pace of change and that awakening and that changing of the world. There are 9.6 kilometers squared of space in China, 1.4 billion people, 19% of global GDP. So it's an enormous place. It's a beautiful place for those of you who haven't been there. And it has a heritage of innovation. So there's been many inventions, the compass, paper, the accidental invention of gunpowder, the Great Wall of China, some of you will have seen them, an incredible innovation in terms of military defense. And what happened in 1978 was when the economic innovation and the economic opening with the open trade policy from Deng Xiaoping kind of heralded a whole new kind of external look point of view of China, of the Chinese, and that has driven incredible growth in exports. And then we move into the current environment where you've got businesses like Alibaba, which is a big retailer, where they are growing exponentially. The other point I want to just raise is the power of the city, the urban environment, and I'll talk a bit more about that. But there are 542 pilot smart city projects registered in China today, the greatest of any country in the world. And the predictions are that China will become the world's largest economy by 2030 with a GDP of 26 trillion pounds. So that's very significant. So it's an enormous power, an enormous force, and I will now just talk a bit more about how that may impact us. On Springwise, you very kindly, Whitney, talked about what we do. We look at innovations around the world every day. We have 20,000 people in 190 countries. They send us innovations, so we track them. And what we've seen over the last 3 years is a big spike in innovations coming from China, from our spotters. And that shows an awareness of kind of innovation culture and this kind of looking outwards as opposed to more inward focused. And we're seeing that pace of acceleration and context increasing as we speak. And final in context, in the time it takes me to go through this slide, which will be exactly 60 seconds, there will be 55,936 drivers will pick up passengers in Didi, which is the equivalent of Uber. Alipay, which is the payment, the kind of the PayPal of China, will take 15 million yuan of fees through it, or of payments. WeChat, which you all know, which is the kind of WhatsApp, 26 million, over 26 million messages delivered, et cetera, et cetera. So the force of the enormous population and the enabling of technology is allowing amazing kind of exponential growth to happen every single moment of the day. That's my 60 seconds. So talking a bit about the metamorphosis of what's happened and how we kind of look at it through this lens that we take at Springwise. What we're seeing is made in China is becoming designed in China. So most of us in here will either be wearing something made in China, will have a component in our phone that is made in China. And indeed, in 2015, China produced 80% of the world's air conditioners, 70% of the world's mobile phones, and 60% of the world's total shoes. So those of you may be wearing some of them now. But what is interesting to see is that China is moving from a kind of manufacturing nation to a nation that is capturing the intellectual property. So in 2020, it is predicted that China will become the world's top patent filer. And that means that they will be looking for the IP associated with brand value and all of the value rather than just the sort of the back end of the logistics, which is the manufacturing. So that is a theme we're seeing, and it is a theme that is accelerating, and it is a theme that will affect us all. So I talked a little bit about WhatsApp. Many of you use WhatsApp. Some of you will have heard of WeChat, which is the equivalent. And in 2011, there was WeChat and there was WhatsApp. But what has happened to WhatsApp, to WeChat, which is the Chinese version of WhatsApp, is in 7 years, it now does not just messaging and calling, but it does you can taxi hail, you can shop, you can book events, you can have food delivery, flights, etc., etc. So what they have done, they have innovated rapidly with that customer base and turned it into a platform business which delivers all sorts of different services. And if I tell you that 80% of mobile phone users in China use WeChat, you can imagine the power of that. Whether that's a good thing or a bad thing, it's certainly something that is existing and shows radical innovation at speed and turning into a genuine platform business. The other area I mentioned earlier is this kind of notion of smart cities. So with the population shift from rural to urban, clearly there is huge opportunity to kind of create the cities of the future and this application of technology to create smart cities. Smart cities have smart everything. The 500 I mentioned earlier, pilot projects, around 320 billion will be generated from these smart city projects by 2025. And I think what is very, very interesting is how these cities are being built. So the top tech firms, you've probably heard of the FANGs in America, so Facebook, Amazon, Netflix, Google. There is a path which is similar businesses in China, and they are kind of driving the creation of these new cities. So you've got tech companies building cities and collaborating on the building of the cities. And that allows some great benefits. So for example, in Hangzhou, the traffic is now connected via the Internet of Things so that when an ambulance goes past, it can go through all the traffic lights quicker and get to the place, get to the hospital quicker. You can go into parking in a much more efficient way because you can go directly there through Internet of Things. Building in kind of intelligent kind of 5G Internet of Things devices into the fabric of cities is something that would be very difficult, for example, to do in London as we retrofit, but these guys are able to do it from the beginning. And one of the things that I think will be very interesting as well is this kind of health information. So all the data is stored as part of the fabric of the city, so when you turn up to the doctor, you have all of those things there. So there's innovation that is going on in the kind of the urban environment, which is, I think, will be world-class, and there's a lot to learn from. And on Springwise, just to give you sort of, we track real innovations every day. So in 2016, we actually found drone delivery going on in rural China. So it wasn't going on in the big cities, but it was done by JD.com, which is one of the fastest growing retailers. And they were using drones to ship in rural areas where there's not sort of problems with air traffic and all of that kind of thing. Already Chinese police are using smart glasses to get information on people and to kind of feed data through. One of my favorites, which maybe Lord Rees would like, is the artificial moon, which is being created to illuminate. So instead of having lights, you have a satellite, which is kind of like a fake moon, all a bit weird. But these things are really happening. And then the final thing is these little homes inside water pipes that are being developed. The point of these is not that these are necessarily all the future. The point is that these ideas are emerging every single day. We're seeing them at Springwise. So I think there is no doubt that China is one of the most innovative and exciting places in the world. It is accelerating absolutely as fast, if not faster, than the US. But there is a cost to this, and I just want to talk a little bit about that. The first thing is, this is great that we all have bicycles, and this is a company called OFO, which had, masses of investment from VCs, all very keen, and it's created, great ways of getting around, and we've seen these guys are in London as well. But there are, I think there are plots of where there are up to 100,000 disused and discarded bikes just sitting in place in the cities, and you find them dumped all over the place, up trees, and even in the UK, I think in London I've seen some of these, in canals and all this kind of stuff. So it's a great, someone's got a great business and all of that kind of stuff, but what is the cost of that, and is that kind of over time a good thing? So building in a more circular approach, I would argue, is very, very important. The pollution in China, those of you who've been to Beijing, if you get it on a bad day, you can't really breathe very, very well at all. Over 1 million people died from air pollution issues in 2016. I think there are 1,000 working coal-fired plants in China, with 700 more set to open in the next few years. So that is not looking like a very positive for the quality of the air. So that's another kind of cost of innovation. And the other thing is around urbanization. So this huge shift of population, along with the growth of population from rural to urban, and how do you deal with that? So Shenzhen was a little fishing village in the late 1970s, and now it's got a population of 11 million. So how is that all happening? And these are issues which are being looked at and dealt with, but they are real issues that are more extreme, if you like, in China than in other places. And then, of course, there is still this inequality, which we need to think about globally. So these are global issues, but accentuated maybe where there's so much population and movement. I think 1% of the aggregated wealth in China is, 1% of the richest 1% have a third of the aggregated wealth of China. So it's a very, very important issue, which again, with some of the geopolitical issues we were talking about earlier, I think could certainly need to be thought about and addressed. So my final section, around what is going to be happening, what are we seeing, and what do we think about that based on all of this. So we're certainly entering the era of global Chinese brands. So at the beginning it was kind of like copying brands and copying ideas, and then delivering to the local markets. Then what happened is that the inspiration came, and they made these better. So WeChat being an example. And now what we're having brands that are Chinese innovations, which are coming to be the global brands. And so what we're seeing is that not only is the power of valuation, so the Deliveroo Groupon they have a combined value of 8.7 billion, and there's an organization that's doing the same thing, where they have a valuation of 51 billion. So the kind of the market opportunity and that kind of associated value, and then you'll know Amazon, of course, and JD.com and Alibaba are the two sort of big e-commerce players in China. And their valuation change, this is according to the brand's EWPP register, is increasing higher than even Amazon. And I mean, we all kind of look at Amazon and go, my goodness, how is that possibly so valuable? But there are things going on in China, and brands that are growing in value even faster. And another whole theme we could talk about for a long time is the amount of investment, the Chinese investment that's going on around the world, not only in the Western world, but also in Africa and other emerging economies. So there's a huge kind of global push using this giant resource. And on that theme, so JD.com, which is one of the big e-commerce giants you may have heard of, they are now coming into Europe. So they have created a $1 billion logistics center in France. They're about to open a research department in Cambridge next year. And they're basically saying, why should Amazon have this? We want to have this. They're also looking for stores in London. There's a brand called Anta, which you may not have heard of, which is looking to take Nike off the top spot of the trainer market, et cetera, et cetera. The Didi Uber kind of discussion is quite well known, and they're fighting each other. Both of them have massive issues. So Didi was reported to have sort of, I think there were 2 murders and 3 rapes in the last few months in some of their in their network. So there's there are sort of issues going on around kind of the safety and all of those other ethical issues that come with this great innovation and technology. And then finally, the power, what we're seeing is a kind of a trend of overseas revenues growing. So whereas before it was more the revenues were growing in China, we're seeing now very high revenues growing internationally. Some of you will have a Huawei phone with you. Some of you will have read that New Zealand have now said that, and other countries have said that they won't have Huawei doing their 5G networks because of the links to the Chinese government. And some of you who were up late last night will have heard that the CFO has been, I think, arrested or apprehended in Canada, and they want to talk to him in the US. So there are issues around all of this in terms of data and all the kind of other things that we're reading about in every day. So final couple of slides. What we know now is that in every kind of core category, there is a Chinese competitor that is growing incredibly fast and now has an aspiration to dominate globally. So what that will mean, I think, is we will start to see these brands along the top, which I will not try and pronounce in any way. They will be coming here. So over the next couple of years, we'll see these brands popping up and appearing in London, in Europe. Nice music. So it's not me. I don't think that's me. But anyway, so I just, some of you may have heard of Singles Day, and I just wanted to make a comparison because we've just had Black Friday. Black Friday online sales in the US was $6 billion this year, $6 billion in one day, $6 billion in one day. In China, 30 billion. So 30 billion in the Black Friday, and that's invented by Alibaba. And I just go through some of these stats. 40% of people brought international brands, so the power of the Chinese consumer internationally as well as locally. 180,000 brands available on one platform. So my favorite is the MAC lipstick. 1 second, 3,700 MAC lipsticks sold. 200 brands joined the 100 million one, which is $40 million club, in that day. And it took them 85 seconds to get to 1 billion in sales. So that is innovation at pace, at scale. It's happening. And here's how it looked, hopefully. Well, I'm going to do the video.
With the final countdown, a sleepless night begins.
So you get the idea. I'm glad I'm not in charge of the logistics for that. Quite staggering. So just final thought. So Eric Schmidt, who was the CEO of Alphabet, the parent company of Google, said, talking about China, that by 2020 they will have caught up. By 2025 they will be better than us, and by 2030 they will dominate the industries of AI. We see AI as one of the most important emerging technologies and industries which will redefine a lot of our futures. And there is no doubt in my mind from thinking about this that China is going to be a major force in the future. The question is, will it be a positive force or a negative force? Can we turn this innovation and this capacity, this wealth, into something positive socially, environmentally, and for the world? I don't know the answer, but I live in hope. Thank you.